Today we're looking at a source that really turns the whole idea of expertise on its head.
Mm-hmm.
We're focusing on Murray Dickson's incredible text, Where There Is No Dentist.
Such an important book, a companion to Where There Is No Doctor.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack its philosophy, which is, well, it's pretty provocative.
It is. It's not just a how-to guide. It's a blueprint for a completely different system. Low-cost, decentralized, and crucially, safe dental care.
And it's all about empowering communities that have basically been left behind by the traditional system.
Right. And you have to understand where it came from. Dickson saw this huge gap. The manuals that existed were either way too simple to be useful, or they were, written for dentists. Super complicated.
They're totally inaccessible.
Totally. The core belief here is that basic dental care, both preventing and treating, shouldn't be some high-level specialty. It should be part of the standard know-how for every single primary health worker.
It's all about self-reliance.
That's the key. A people-centered approach. Giving people the tools to manage their own health without the huge costs of a centralized system. The barrier isn't a diploma, it's just knowledge.
Which brings us to, I think, the most radical argument in the entire book.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that most professional dentists are actually overtrained.
It's a challenging thought, isn't it? I mean, they spend years and years mastering oral surgery, orthodontics, complex root canals.
All incredibly difficult skill.
No doubt. But the book asks, what do they do most days?
Pulling, drilling, and filling.
Exactly. The high-volume, simpler tasks. So the book poses this really uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
Is all that expensive long-term training actually necessary for the frontline care most people need?
And it provides evidence to say, maybe not.
Right. It points to a study done in Boston, of all places.
In the USA.
Yep. And it found that dental technicians who had much shorter training periods performed basic treatments just as well as the university-trained dentists.
And sometimes even better, it says.
Sometimes better, yeah.
Wow. So if that's true, it suggests the problem isn't a lack of talent. It's that we're focusing on the wrong kind of training for community needs.
And it becomes a political issue, right? Because if these local workers are just as effective, that threatens the established power structure.
Absolutely. And the book has this perfect example from Honduras.
The union, yeah. It's an amazing story.
Tell us about that.
So there was this organized union of dental technicians. They were providing care, and a professional dentist in a town called Trujillo tried to shut one of them down.
Why? What happened?
The dentist had messed up an extraction and left an infected root behind. The technician fixed it successfully, and the dentist tried to sue him for practicing illegally.
And what was the outcome?
The union took it to court, and they won. It was this huge victory that basically legitimized their right to provide care.
So it's about political self-determination, not just learning a skill.
It has to be. And you see that same empowerment in the stories from Mexico with Project Piaxla.
Right, where they train these village workers, they called edentics.
Yep. And these are people who often had, maybe 3 to 6 years of primary school. That's it.
And they weren't just learning to pull teeth.
Oh, not at all. They started there, but they went on to teach each other how to make dentures, do more advanced fillings.
And there's that one story about the root canal.
It's incredible. One of the dentics, just by watching a visiting dentist, taught himself how to do a root canal to save his girlfriend's infected front tooth.
Wait, he taught herself root canal work just by watching? I mean, that's both amazing and a little terrifying.
It is, but it shows what happens when practical need just completely overrides the need for a formal credential.
And the book makes a point about learning, right?
A really key insight. It says that villagers with little formal schooling often learn these hands-on skills, like extractions, much faster than university students.
Because they're not stuck in a classroom.
Exactly.
Right.
The best way to learn is by doing it, by practicing with someone who knows their stuff. It's an apprenticeship model.
Which flows right into the book's core philosophy on prevention, because obviously that's the easiest and safest route for everyone.
And the most needed. The book points out that tooth decay and gum disease are like 2 of the fastest growing health problems in the world.
And it blames 2 main things.
2 huge societal shifts. First, people moving away from their own homegrown fiber-rich foods toward
soft, sugary, store-bought stuff.
Precisely. And second, just not cleaning well enough after eating it.
It also makes a really interesting point about the type of sugar.
Yeah, this is critical. Natural sugar in fruit makes acid slowly. The body can handle it. But factory sugar, refined sugar,
It makes acid almost instantly.
just attacks the teeth. That combination of sticky food and fast acid is just a disaster for dental health.
So in chapter 1, it lays out this foundation. You can't have healthy teeth without healthy gums. And you can't have healthy gums without clean teeth. They're totally interdependent.
And good teeth mean good health, good looks, clear speech, everything. It's all connected.
But the teaching doesn't start with the community.
No, this is so important. It starts with the health worker. The text is very clear. You cannot be a credible teacher if your own mouth is a mess.
Your own teeth are your best teaching tool.
Exactly. Lead by example.
So what are the first steps for prevention, especially for kids?
It starts with infants. They say breastfeed to help teeth grow strong. But the big warning is about bottles.
The bottle mouth problem.
Right. Never give a baby sweet liquids in a bottle. No sweet tea, no juice. It just pools around their new teeth and causes terrible decay. Even milk can do it if it's left on the teeth overnight.
And for cleaning, when a child is too young to do it themselves?
The parents have to do it, or an older sibling, once a day with a soft brush and just water.
Just water, no toothpaste.
No toothpaste. And the reason is so practical. The foam from toothpaste hides the teeth. You can't actually see if you're getting them clean. With just water, you can look and be sure.
That is brilliant. It's about tailoring the advice to what actually works on the ground.
And that practical approach carries over into how they teach. Chapter 4 is all about education methodology.
And it insists that you have to combine treatment and prevention.
Always. Because you have to address the person's immediate need first, which is usually pain.
Right. If you fix their toothache, they'll trust you.
And then they'll actually listen to your advice on how to stop it from happening again. It builds that trust.
The book also says to use activities, not lectures, and build on what people already know.
The association of ideas. The example from Jamaica is perfect.
The machete one.
Yeah. To explain gum disease, they ask, what do you do if someone attacks you with a machete? And everyone says, I run away.
So the bone runs away from the germs.
Exactly. It's simple, it's relatable, and the concept clicks instantly.
Okay, so moving from prevention to treatment, this brings us to the really critical part. How do you ensure safety in these low-resource areas?
The first rule, the biggest rule, is stay clean. It's repeated over and over.
Because the risk of transmitting things like hepatitis or tetanus or HIV is just huge.
It's life and death. So the manual is incredibly specific about sterilization.
And since they don't have autoclaves, they recommend a pressure cooker.
It's an absolutely ingenious solution. They figured out that wet heat, steam under pressure, is the surest way to kill almost all the dangerous germs.
So how does it work? A regular kitchen pressure cooker.
A regular one, yeah.
Yeah.
They say to use one with a safety hole in the lid. You put in 2 cups of water and 2 spoonfuls of cooking oil.
Cooking oil? Why?
To keep the rubber gasket on the lid from drying out and cracking. So clever. Then you bring it to a hiss, turn it on low, and leave it for 30 minutes after it starts hissing.
30 minutes under pressure, and that's enough.
That's enough to get true sterilization. It's a perfect example of adapting technology to meet a critical safety standard.
And what about things that don't touch blood, like a mirror?
For those, simple disinfection is okay. They recommend either a specific alcohol solution or a 5% bleach solution. But the key is the instruments have to be completely submerged for a full 30 minutes. No shortcuts.
The level of detail shows just how seriously they take safety.
They have to.
Now, let's widen the lens a bit. Later editions of the book added a whole chapter on HIV and AIDS. Why is dental care so critical for someone with HIV?
It's a profound life-saving connection. The text says that for a person with HIV, a clean mouth is essential for survival.
Because it lets them eat?
Exactly. If they can eat well, they can stay strong, maintain their weight, and live longer, healthier lives. Good dental care is part of their overall survival strategy.
And the book actually teaches health workers to recognize oral signs of HIV.
Yes, which can lead to early intervention. The most common sign is thrush white or red patches that might bleed, but also persistent sores or something called Kaposi sarcoma, which are these red or purple patches.
And by recognizing these, the worker can help fight the fear and discrimination around the illness.
Right. It normalizes it as a health condition that needs care, just like anything else.
And connecting back to that idea of eating well, there's a whole chapter on nutrition.
Chapter 5. It goes back to the basics, organizing food into 3 simple categories for teaching.
Grow, glow, and go foods.
It's so easy to remember. Grow food is protein, glow food is vitamins and minerals, and go food is energy.
But with the big warning about certain go foods?
A huge warning. White sugar, honey, molasses, they give you energy, but they are, and the book calls them this, high-octane tooth attackers. They just wreck teeth.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the less glamorous side. Logistics and waste disposal. This has to be a major concern.
It's a huge public health risk if it's not handled properly,
Yeah.
especially sharp wastes like used needles.
What's the protocol?
Very specific. You need a metal or hard plastic container. You fill it halfway with a 5% bleach solution, put the sharps in, seal it tightly, and then you have to bury it deep.
And far away from water or where kids might play.
Absolutely. And there's a critical warning in there too, something that might seem like an easy solution.
Don't burn plastic.
Never. Never burn plastic gloves or syringes. The smoke and ash are incredibly poisonous. It's a huge danger to the whole community.
The scale of the need that the book describes is just. It's staggering. It says a small clinic might see 200 people a month and find 6 who need extractions, 2 who need fillings. It's constant.
And that's why they advise workers to order supplies for 3 to 12 months at a time, because the need is always there and the supply chain is not.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear this is so much more than a dental manual. It's a model for community health built on really accessibility and simplicity.
And rigorous safety. It proves that you don't need a diploma for these essential skills. You need dedication, you need practical training, and a real commitment to teaching others.
And that role of teacher seems to be the most important one for the health worker.
It is. They're there to share knowledge, to help people overcome fear, and to fight discrimination.
The whole thing just forces you to look at our own systems, doesn't it?
It really does. If people with minimal resources can, out of sheer necessity, learn to do this kind of complex work safely and effectively. What does that say about the barriers we've put up in our own societies?
So that's the final thought for you to take away. What essential, high-value skills do we keep locked behind expensive professional training in our own communities, and how could that knowledge be decentralized safely and effectively?
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.